Welcome everyone to the Naturalist training. My name is Deb Kramer. I'm the founder and executive director of Keep Coyote Creek Beautiful, and I'll be your moderator for tonight. I've been an outdoorsy person since I was a kid and have been hiking, backpacking, and gardening for decades. And over the past 9 years, I've had the great fortune to build a community around Coyote Creek through Keep Coyote Creek Beautiful's events. Through our BioBlitz events, I've met some truly amazing people. And in this presentation, you will meet 3 of them. In our training today, we're here to talk about the magnificent insects that live around us, insects that are fascinating creatures. They are found in almost every habitat on Earth. They can feed on diverse food resources, and we will also explore techniques to find insects at home or on a hike, and how to document them using iNaturalist. So listen in as Merav, Vonshak, Barbara Banfield, and Eddie Dunbar share their passion for insects. And we'll be able to have some time for questions and answers. So let me tell you a bit about Coyote Creek and Keep Coyote Creek Beautiful. So Coyote Creek is a 64-mile long river starting at Henry Coe Park. It winds through Coyote Valley, downtown San Jose, Milpitas, and ultimately into San Francisco Bay. Has huge diversity of wildlife and ecosystems. And you can see a little bit of that just from the photos here. About Keep Coyote Creek Beautiful, well, that's the organization that I founded in 2015. Coming up on 10 years, I can't believe it. What we do are 3 basic things. We care for and advocate for the creek. We educate people about the value of a healthy creek. And we also offer recreational activities to connect with the Coyote Creek watershed. And you can see a few photos here. We do a lot of creek cleanups. And we actually have a number of bike rides that we've done. And all these things are in collaboration with others. So we like to say that everything is connected, and therefore we have our 3 parts of our mission to connect everything. We like to engage people and provide a voice for the creek. We also encourage people to participate in some of our fun activities to get some fresh air, go on a hike, meet some new people. And then we also do a lot of education where people learn about the watershed, see what's so special about the urban landscape in the form of hikes or walks, or even our BioBlitz events that we do in concert with Merav. So we really think about how we build community around nature and Coyote Creek. And it's really about how people are part of our ecosystem, not separate from it. And just for a frame of reference, here's a map of the Coyote Creek watershed and some of the major parks. You can see the headwaters in the south at Henry Coe Park, and winding through Coyote Valley and Highway 101, and then through Milpitas and the Coyote Creek Trail out to the bay. And if you haven't already been a part of these, we have the Naturalist training series on our YouTube channel. And you can see here a variety of the different topics that we've covered. If you go to YouTube and type in at Keep Coyote Creek Beautiful or off our website, you'll be able to access these training series. So at this point, I'm going to hand it over to Merav Vonshak, who will be giving us a brief introduction to insects. And then we'll have Barbara Banfield really go into a little more depth of bees or flies. And then Eddie Dunbar will be talking about bugs or beetles. And then we'll finish up with some more in-depth question and answer. So right now, let me introduce Merav Vonshak. She founded BioBlitz Club, which is a community science organization to encourage people to get outside and learn about nature. Through this group's actions over the nearly past 8 years, she's hosted over 100 events, and but also over 2,000 people who've participated and contributed to the growing body of knowledge about nature through iNaturalist. And Merav will open our presentation, as I mentioned, by giving an overview of insects and some basics about them and their incredible importance in our global ecosystem. Take it away, Merav.
Thank you, Deb. Amazing Insects, that's my title here. So if you're unlike me, not really into insects. So I'm an entomologist. I studied insects and I love insects, but not everyone does, and I accept that. But insects are really important. If you look at this figure to the right, you could see that they're a very large part of wildlife. So out of all the species that were documented, insects are over 50% of the species. And these are just the ones that were already described by a scientist. But there are far more species than that. So in North America alone, there are over 90,000 species of insects and about 1.1 million species worldwide. And this is insects alone. But these are the described ones. So the estimate is that there are about 5 to 10 million species of insects worldwide. The problem is that we keep losing species. As we speak, they disappear because of habitat loss, invasive species, and many other problems. And I think in the future, I can see a webinar just about that. It's a very wide topic that I'd like to get into in more depth. But for now, just to kind of keep us all on the same page, when we look at this beautiful ant, one of my favorite, the winter ant, then it belongs to the kingdom of animals, phylum arthropods, class Insecta, and then the order is called Hymenoptera, which is wasps, bees, and ants. So we will focus at this level of different orders of insects. And there are 27 known orders of insects. And if we look at them on a phylogenetic tree, then you could see the different groups, some of the main groups of insects. And these are the ones that we will focus on today. The interesting thing is just these 4 different orders of insects actually contain about 75% of all known species. And this is one of the reasons we will focus on those groups today. So just a few insect characteristics in general. So all insects, just like the rest of the arthropods, have exoskeleton, unlike our body that has internal bones. They have their skeleton on the outside. And their body is comprised of 3 different body parts. The head has 3 pairs of mouth parts that together form their mouth, and 1 pair of antennae. The thorax has 3 pairs of legs and between 0 to 2 pairs of wings. The abdomen, which is under those wings on that beetle, has sometimes different kind of appendages, just like, a little robot with all sorts of cool gadgets. Those are usually used for reproduction. And you can see that on this grasshopper as well, with the compound eyes that most insects have. And some of them also have simple eyes here, 3 pairs of legs, antenna, and everything else. When we look at those mouth parts, you could see that this grasshopper here has rather simple mouth parts. This is the more common mouth parts in different groups of insects. They're called biting mouth parts, and they can be used for different tasks. Other insects have more specialized mouth parts, like this bee, butterfly, and mosquito here, that have sucking mouth parts, but pretty different from one another. So those are more specialized. And then I'd like to also talk a little bit about the metamorphosis, because these characteristics, the mouth parts, the body parts, and the metamorphosis are important when we try to look at the differences between orders of insects. So in general, there are 3 different groups. There's the first group, Ametabola, that has no metamorphosis, basically. So from the egg hatches a little larva that would keep molting. So all insects, like other arthropods, need to molt in order to grow, to shed their exoskeleton, and they have a new, fresh exoskeleton underneath that will allow them to get a bit bigger than what they were. In this group, these insects will continue molting throughout their lifetime, even after they become adults and can start reproducing. The second group is the hemimetabola, or that have incomplete or partial metamorphosis. So these insects will hatch from their egg into a nymph. The nymph will feed on whatever they're feeding on and keep molting a few times until they become adults, usually with wings. The nymph looks pretty similar to the adult, other than the wings, and sometimes colors are slightly different, but they often live in the same habitat, feeding on the same food. The last group, the holometabola, has a complete metamorphosis, just like what you learned at daycare about butterflies. A few groups of insects have this characteristic where from the egg we'll have a larva hatching. The larva will feed and grow and molt a few times until it becomes, it molts again into a pupa stage. The pupa stage usually doesn't feed, but sometimes can actually move. And then it will molt one more time into an adult insect. The adult insect, that's the final size, okay? So if you see a little ant, it won't become a bigger ant. That's the size of that adult insect. But what you can see is that the adult here is often very different than the larva, both in the way it looks, but also often in their habitat or the food, which is critical because it means that they can utilize different food and different habitats so they don't compete with each other. And that's a very useful technique. And probably one of the reasons why there's so many insects all around us. The insect larva could look very different than the adult stage. And these are just some examples of different insect larvae. Of course, there are many different ones. The insect larva is pretty interesting because it could tell you a lot about the shape, could tell you a lot about their function, okay? What do they feed on? How do they need to get there? And all that stuff. And of course, we could do a whole webinar just about that, but we will continue. So just a little note about documentation. Again, as an entomologist and slightly addicted to community science or citizen science, I love to document whatever I see. So I take a photo of, for example, this little skipper, and then I'll upload it to my iNaturalist, where I can add more information. iNaturalist will not only help me identify what I saw using AI, but also real people might look at my observations later and help me identify it. And I can make it, I can improve my observation a little bit by adding all sorts of information. And we have a whole webinar just about that. We will share a link to a YouTube channel with you afterwards. So if you missed some of our previous webinars, you could catch up on how to document different things.
So Barbara Banfield grew up in Kansas City, where she became a naturalist at the age of 4, focusing on capturing and observing insects. And she is still attempting to meet and learn about insects and other life forms. She studied environmental planning and public policy at UCSC. Go Banana Slugs. And whilst volunteering as a docent at various parks and museums, including Año Nuevo. She also became a naturalist at McClellan Ranch Preserve in Cupertino. And she shared her passion for learning about natural history for over 35 years there. And she retired in 2021, but continues to search for insects, birds, plants, and fungi by day and posting them on iNaturalist in the evening. Welcome, Barbara.
Howdy. So I'm going to talk about the order Diptera, which is the flies, and then the order Hymenoptera, which includes the bees and wasps. It also includes the ants and sawflies, but I'm really going to focus just on a few families in these in the Diptera and Hymenoptera, just on those flies that look like bees and wasps and could be confused, and then how you can tell them apart. So I've already kind of given the introduction, but in addition to how what the characteristics of these insects are, I just want to talk about their kind of how they relate to the environment and each other, and then what clues you can have to identify them. So flies, they're a really diverse group. There are flies that are tiny little gnats and midges. There are mosquitoes. There are big horse flies that buzz around with a lot of noise and speed. And so there's a big variety, but as I said, I'm going to really focus on the ones that resemble bees and flies later on. But I want to go over all their what characteristics they all share. Most winged insects have 4 wings or 2 pairs of wings. Flies are a little different. They have 1 pair of wings, and where their second pair was located, they have a structure called halteres that are like little drumsticks. They're like little sticks with balls on the end that they believe are used to help as a sense organ to help the flight with flight. And if you think about Simone Biles spinning around in the air and how she has to know where to land, well, I think these wings, these structures, the halteres behind the wings, help the fly with sense where it is in space and helps them fly well. They also have large compound eyes. Sometimes on some flies, it seems like its eyes are the most of the head are eyes. They have very short antennae. They don't have chewing mouth parts. They have either a sucking mouth part, like mosquitoes can stab you with something and suck up blood, or they have a sponging mouth part. You might have seen a fly on your land on your kitchen counter where you spilled some lemonade or something, and it will go around sponging, using its mouth part to soak that liquid up. They are all holometabolists, which means they go through a complete metamorphosis. They have a larva stage, which does not have any true legs. Like if you look at a caterpillar, they will have jointed legs, 6 jointed legs in front, and then fleshy legs in back. Usually fly larvae have no legs at all. They often are called maggots. Some of these larvae without true legs have little fleshy protuberances that look almost like caterpillar legs. So here's the one of the advantages of that developmental pattern they call homometabolism, where they go through complete metamorphosis, is that the larvae and the adults can be in the same environment, but they aren't competing with each other. Here on the left, you see a syrphid fly larva. It looks a little bit like a caterpillar with those fleshy body parts that kind of function as legs. But this larva is munching on some aphids. And that's what it does all its life. It eats soft-bodied insects on not its whole life, all of its larval stage. And then it pupates, and then the adult fly will depend on nectar and pollen as a resource. So they are not competing with each other. A lot of fly larvae, you saw the syrphid fly larva in the previous slide was preying on aphids. Some fly larvae are what they call parasitoids. They are parasites that will eventually kill the host animal. Unlike fleas that may suck your cat or dog's blood but really does no major harm to the animal. Flies that some fly larvae live inside other arthropods as parasites. They eat them while they're living. Here's a caterpillar, one of the common woolly bears that you often see. And this was one I had attempted to raise to see what kind of moth it turned into. And eventually it shriveled up and out popped these two little pupas form. Pupae, they're not the plural is pupae, not pupas. But then they would, from those pupae, would emerge flies like the one you see on the right. This is a tachinid fly, another family of flies I'll talk about in a bit. Oh, here are the tachinid flies. So they tend to as a family. Most of them are pretty bristly, not soft and fuzzy like bee fuzz, but they kind of have stiff hairs. And some of them have a lot of those stiff hairs, like the one in the lower right. The one in the upper right, you have to look carefully. It has those stiff hairs, but they're kind of sparse. There's some of them on their legs and some on their abdomen. And then the one in the lower left, it's really hard to see, but it does have a few bristly hairs. All of them in their larval stage are parasitoids on arthropods, mostly on insects. And as adults, they are pollinators. Another group of another family of flies is the bee fly, aptly named because they can really, a lot of people see them buzzing around and assume there's some sort of fuzzy bumblebee. Some people refer to them as kind of flying teddy bears because they are very chubby, fuzzy, and cute. They have a very characteristic proboscis. The proboscis is the mouth part that in the bee flies is used to suck up nectar. When they land, they have their wings out in a characteristic position, kind of back at a 45-degree angle. The wings are often marked with dark patches or stripes or borders. When they're flying around, they move very quickly and they can turn on a dime. They hover. A lot of flies are not able to hover, but these hover. They often hover while they're feeding at flowers. They often hover over the ground. If I'm walking in the spring, especially along a trail, I'll often see bee flies flying very low to the ground, hovering back and forth. And I wondered for a long time what they were doing. And then I learned that most bee flies lay their eggs in the burrows of other insects. These may be native bees that burrow in the ground, and they may be tiger beetles or crickets burrows, and then they will flick an egg in there without even landing, and that egg will hatch and will feed on the nectar and pollen the native bee left for its larva, and then eventually it will feed on the larva. These are soldier flies. Soldier flies have a very characteristic abdomen shape. It tends to be kind of flattened, so it often has a little ridge around the edge. They can be fairly large and often are mistaken for wasp because they have markings that make you think of a wasp marking, yellow and black in the case of the one on top, sometimes black and white, or even green and white. Their larvae can sometimes carnivorous, while others are very good at breaking down decaying vegetation or manure. This is one particular soldier fly I wanted to focus on because it's probably the most common one in our area. I looked on iNaturalist and I saw that in Santa Clara County, people had posted 344 observations of flies from the family that soldier flies are in. And of those, almost half were black soldier flies, this species here. And these are very common if you have a home compost, and you might have noticed when you're digging through it or turning it some very unusual larvae, like the one you see in the upper right. That's the larvae of the black soldier fly. You might be alarmed that you're going to have a lot of pesky flies around your house if you leave them there. But these black soldier flies are actually very important in reducing housefly populations, or the larvae of, because they will munch on the larvae of other flies that may lay their eggs in compost. So that includes fruit flies. They'll keep down fruit fly population, housefly population. And then they'll pupate and turn into a beautiful black and white adult that you may mistake for a wasp. These are very interesting because people are now, because they're so good at breaking down organic material like manure or compost or food waste, they are being used commercially for that purpose. And then sometimes the larva and pupa are then fed to livestock. These are the hoverflies, the family Syrphidae. Sometimes people call them flower flies because guess what? They are often seen around flowers. These are the adults, use the flowers as a resource, feeding on nectar and pollen, and they serve, they're very good pollinators. And then their larvae are again parasitoids. They lay, or predators. They are often used as biological control agents. I think more of them are predators than parasitoids in this family. Robber flies. Now, most robber flies do not resemble bees or wasps. They are very distinctive. They tend to have a long, thin abdomen. They tend to have kind of a humpback shaped. That's because they're very powerful flyers, and that thorax, where the thick part is where their flight muscles are. They have very big eyes, and they have a kind of a lot of flies. They seem to be the head and the thorax. There's no real kind of skinny neck part, but these robber flies do, because their head is very mobile. They're predators that use those large eyes to hunt for flying insects, and then they snatch them out of the air. They grab them with their legs. Sometimes they slam into them with their bodies, and then they pierce them with a piercing mouth part that paralyzes them. Their legs are fairly long for grabbing insects and carrying them off. And they prey on lots of insects, from dragonflies to butterflies to bees. And they tend to be pretty hairy, and they kind of have if you see their front end, they look like almost they have a big mustache. I said most robber flies are not mistaken for bees or wasps, but there's a group of robber flies that are bee mimics. And if this one, as you look at it here, you can see it's much slimmer than a bumblebee would be. There are a lot of distinct differences between it and bumblebees, but if it's flying around, buzzing past you, and you see this fuzzy black and yellow thing, you might mistake it for a bumblebee. But when they land, you can see that they're very different. They have much shorter antennae. Their legs are much longer. It has, if you look at the end of its legs, they look like they have two toes. A lot of flies have these fleshy pads at the end of their legs that are kind of characteristic. And bees and wasps do not have these little broad pads. As again, I mentioned, they have a kind of constricted neck and eyes that are kind of raised up high. So I've talked about a lot of flies so far, flies especially that could be mistaken for bees and wasps. Now I want to go over some of the characteristics of bees and wasps. They're in the order Hymenoptera, along with other insects, large groups of insects like ants and sawflies. But most of them, of bees and wasps, have 4 wings or 2 pairs of wings. Occasionally you have some wasps that have no wings, like the one you see in the lower left. That's a velvet ant. It's not a true ant, it is a wasp. And you want to make sure you don't pick up that cuddly looking thing, because it has a very powerful sting. Flies have usually a constriction between their thorax and their abdomen. So they have the term wasp waisted. It was really apt for a lot of these species, more so in the wasp than in the bees. They have ovipositors. An ovipositor is the structure that females insects have for laying eggs. And in bees and wasps, it is often modified into a stinger. And they are often have venom. So here we have a few. We have a tarantula hawk at the upper right. We have a fly, a wasp that in the upper left that it's very slim looking, and they often have extremely long ovipositors that they use not for stinging but for depositing eggs, sometimes deep into a tree trunk where an insect larva may be feeding a bark beetle or something, and they can lay their egg within the beetle. They can find it through the wood. There are the bees and wasps come in a variety of shapes, sizes, and colors. Okay, one thing that distinguishes wasp from bees is that they are, in their larval stage, they are all insect eaters, or almost all insect eaters. A few of them, like yellow jackets, instead of eating insect meat, they may scavenge around a carcass of a dead deer, or they may show up at your picnic and find your hamburger or hot dog and chew off bits of that meat. And they are not eating that themselves. They are carrying that back to their larva. And so their larvae are the heavy protein feeders. And the adult wasp feed on nectar like bees. But some adults will also feed. You'll see them at this time of year as pears and apples and peaches are falling from trees. You'll often see them gathered around some rotting fruit and chewing off bits of that. But that's not something a food they will take to their larvae. They feed them, as I mentioned, insects. And then here, this picture is of something we don't see in our area very often. It's a large wasp called a cicada killer. It stings cicadas to paralyze them, and then will carry them back to a burrow where then they will lay their eggs on the cicada and their larva will feed on it. So now remember this picture of a wasp carrying an insect, and we'll go to the next slide. So bees are, they believe bees evolved from wasp, but they started specializing in feeding pollen to their larvae. And if you saw that last slide, one adult wasp carrying an insect back to its burrow for its larva to feed on. But you can't carry pollen with your like grains of pollen. That'd be too hard. So that's why bees evolved. The fuzziness they have is to help them transport pollen more efficiently. So they have a lot, are not only hairy all over their body, but they have special structure hairs that they refer to as scopy or pollen baskets. At the fly on top is has scopy or special curved hairs that they can pack pollen that's been moistened and made sticky with some nectar from the flower, and they pack it into those hairs on the underside of the abdomen. So some bees have this special scopa on the bottom of the abdomen, but you might be more familiar with scopy on the hind legs of certain bees, like honeybees or bumblebees. They have their hind legs have these curved hairs that are very good at carrying in pollen. Okay, so how do you tell wasp, bees, and flies from each other? It can be really hard because some of them are very good mimics of each other. But there are a few things to look for. Wasp, when they land, and they're at rest, they tend to have their wings stretched back along either side of their abdomen and kind of parallel to their abdomen. They also tend to have a more pointed abdomen tip than bees do. And they have fairly long antennae and eyes that are more oval shaped on the side of their head. Then bees often have their wings folded neatly over the top of their abdomen when they're at rest. They also have longer antennae than flies and oval eyes like the wasp do on the side of their head, but they tend to have more rounded abdomen tips. And they tend to be a lot fuzzier than wasps are. And then at the right is a fly, a syrphid fly. And when they rest, they often have their wings out at kind of 45-degree angles sticking out. They tend to have very short, stubby antennae. And then they have eyes that can sometimes take up most of the front of their head and meet in the middle. Not always. It tends to, in some fly families, this is more noticeable than in others. But, you know, I looked at, in looking for these photos for this presentation, I noticed that there are as many exceptions to these tips I just gave you as there are. You know, you can find yellow jackets that have their wings over their back or wings more out to their side. You can find bees too resting with their wings out to the side. So while these are pretty good rules of thumb for distinguishing them, there are lots of exceptions. And that's it, I think.
So Barbara, we had a few questions that were in the chat that I'd like to read to you and get you back on. So the first one is from Jeff. He asks, typically what percentage of insect eggs make it all the way to adult stage? What are the determinants of full maturation?
Oh, you know, I have no idea, you know, what percentage, but I think probably there's a lot of loss. That's why they try to lay a lot of eggs. Like the bee flies that I mentioned hover over a burrow of another fly and flip their egg in. They say that they've studied them and they're very accurate about getting their eggs in the burrow, but they often don't know if that burrow is fully packed with pollen and a larva already. So sometimes their egg lands someplace where it's not going to have the food source it needs. Also, there's a lot of insects that go around collecting. If you watch ants carrying things off, you sometimes see them carrying dead insects, but they can also find insect eggs and carry them off. There's just a lot of predation on eggs and larvae. So I think there's probably a small percentage of the eggs that are laid that make it to adulthood, but I don't know any percent.
Well, along the lines of eggs, Susanna asked, so eggs are laid via the stinger? Isn't a question? Is that true?
Yes,
okay.
That is true. The stinger and, well, it's an ovipositor that's been modified. And now in honeybees, most of the bees that might sting you are worker bees, and they don't lay any eggs. It is just the queen bee that lays eggs, but she can also sting. She can use her ovipositor for laying eggs as well as stinging.
So we also have a question from Dawn. Can iNaturalist identify larvae or eggs as well as an adult insect?
Some eggs are very distinct. Like I think Eddie's about to show you some pictures of lady beetle eggs that are distinctive and some true bug eggs that have a distinctive barrel shape. it's the trick is getting they're very small, so you have to get very good pictures of them. And I think there are fewer people out there that are going to be able to identify them, but you might find somebody. But and larva are, again, there's probably going to be fewer people who can identify larvae than adults. They're often less distinctive for caterpillars and things like that with bright colors. Those those can be easily identified more so than like a fly maggot that is often, they look very similar to each other, different species.
So it's expect then that when putting a observation in iNaturalist, you'd want to also include what the plant is that you found.
That would be very helpful.
So another question from Jeff is, are wasps pollinators?
Yes, they are. They're probably less efficient because their smooth bodies don't collect as much pollen and transport it, but they can be effective at pollinating some plants.
Eddie is a professor in Merritt College's landscape horticulture, where he teaches insect identification and management. The class focuses on increasing ecosystem health by striking a balance between human needs and ecosystem sustainability. Also, he is the founder and president of Insect Sciences Museum of California, ISMC, which engages the public to increase knowledge of insects in San Francisco's Bay Area landscapes and open spaces. The organization hosts an annual bug camp and bioblitzes throughout California. And his influential insect field guides, which include Lake Merritt and Greater Oakland insects, and most recently, Insects of Point Malate, I hope I'm saying that right, which was used to put Point Malate near Richmond, California, on track to become a new East Bay Regional Park. That's wonderful, Eddie. So I'll have you go ahead and take it away.
Thank you, Deb, and thanks for having me on, you and Merav, and thank you, Barbara, for covering the flies and the bees and wasps. We're going to talk now about true bugs and beetles. So there's a lot of confusion sometimes about true bugs and beetles. First of all, let's talk about the word bugs.
Okay.
Typically, yeah, so there's like a lot of people will think that anything that is crawling.
Eddie Dunbar. Is he also on volunteer? Dunbar.
Sorry.
Sorry, I got that.
People will think that things that are around or that you can fit into a jar is a bug. But for scientists, true bugs are a specific type of insect. And we're going to cover some of the features that those are. And then beetles, they're often confused with beetles because they both have kind of a hard exterior. So let's kind of delve into what these are. So there's three different things you're going to notice on these insects. They have different types of wings and different types of mouth parts. And if we look at the wings, where the wings come together, this is where they come together on a beetle. And on a true bug, they come together at the edges. So they come together at the edges on a bug, and on a beetle, they come together kind of towards the middle. And because you have that connection like that, you can't see my hands maybe, but if you look at the group photo group, you'll be able to see it. But the back wings kind of overlap. So they come this way and then they cross that way. So this whole area right here is one wing. And then this is part of a wing that's covered up by this other wing. Where beetles, the wings come together in a straight line down the back. So if you look at the back of a beetle, you're going to see a line here. And there's an area right here where they come together. It forms kind of a triangle. And that's called the scutellum. Here it's very small on the beetles. A lot of times you can't even notice it. But on the bugs, because the wings are overlapping and they connect at the sides, you got a big triangle in the middle. So look for that triangle and that will pretty much help you narrow it down to a bug. Now, beetles comprise about 75% of all insects. They're the most diverse life form on the planet. So there's a lot of different types of beetles and a lot of different type habitats that they live in, lots of different things they eat. So that's one of the differences. The beetles are highly diverse, where the true bugs are not so much. The front wings of beetles, again, are hardened, and only part of the wing of a true bug is hardened. And it's really not as hard as a beetle. It's called leathery. And then the back of the wing is membranous, kind of like a wasp or fly's wings or bee's wings. It's you can see through it most often. Sometimes it's smoky. And where that comes together on the back of the bug, there's usually a membranous part at the back. So you're going to look for that also. So those three things, and then the mouth parts. So on a beetle, pretty much most of them you're going to have mandibles. They may be small or they may be large. I got a tiger beetle here, which has large mandibles. That is not a bug. Okay. And then looking at the true bugs, they have a beak, or it's called a rostrum, and some people call it proboscis. But this is a structure that they use to stick into plants or animals that they're feeding on. So those are the differences. The different wing types, that's both how they come together. The scutellum, the back wings are always membranous for the insects that do have the wings. And then the mouth parts are also different. So here we see on the beetles, there are 4 different beetles here, and each one of them has a line down the back. This one here on the June bug, or June beetle, sorry, you almost got me. And then a lady beetle. So lady beetles used to be called ladybugs. They are not bugs. They're lady beetles. So you've got a line down the back. And looking at this golden buprested, which is California's most beautiful insect, in my opinion, and some of others, you're going to have this line down the back showing it's a beetle. That very tiny scutellum. You don't even see a scutellum here. There's no scutellum here, but there is one here. So this is still a beetle. You've got the line down the back. Sometimes the scutellum is obvious and sometimes it's not. And again, it's the most, beetles are we're going to cover the beetles first. They're the most diverse life form on the planet. There's an estimated 1.5 million species total, but it can be larger than that as we still continue to find new species. In America north of Mexico, there are about 25,000 species, an estimated 130 families. In California, we have 7,300 species. So these are some of the beetles that you might see. There are the leaf beetles. There's the lady beetles. These 2 families are sometimes confused for each other. It's really hard to tell the difference, but we're not going to cover that today. And then you have fireflies, which are not flies. One of the ways you know an insect is not a fly, when it has fly in its name, like butterfly is not a fly, is if it's 2 different words, then it is a true fly. And the same thing with bugs. If it has potato bug in it as a name, that's 1 word. If it's 2 words, then it's a true bug. And the same thing with the flies. So this here is one of the tenebrionids. This is a ground-dwelling beetle called a darkling beetle. And they're pretty much always dark. And they're, again, on the ground. This is a soldier beetle. We'll cover that in a little bit. This is called a tumbling beetle, which sits on top of flowers. And when you try to catch it, it will tumble into the brush and then you'll lose it. This is a click beetle. This is Darwin. I forgot the name of this guy. This is a soft-bodied beetle. And then this is a June beetle. So this is one of the interesting groups of beetles we have in California. The scarab beetles. You might think that we don't have scarabs here. We do. They're just kind of not as big as the ones that you might see in Africa or Egypt. They're really important in the nitrogen cycle because they have this habit of getting into poop and then they spread it around. And so that helps the plants to grow. And actually, this one is not cyclocephala. I have the name wrong here. It is a dung beetle, but that's not its genus name. And the dung beetles, again, live in poop. If you turn over a cow patty, horse hockey, you're going to find these little grubs underneath there. And this one, Rolled up like this is about the size of the head of a thumbtack. So they're not very big at all. There are some larger ones. And they tend to be C-shaped and have a head capsule that's darkened. And again, you'll find these under cow patties. If you ever, no, we won't talk about collecting. So this is an adult June beetle. This is called the 10-line June beetle. If you count the lines on its back, they're going to be 10. 5 on this side and 5 on the other side. Some of the characteristics of these beetles is that they have these spikies on their tarsals, on their tibia. So if you looked at your tibia, and you were this beetle, you would have spikes coming off the sides of your tibia, and that's one of the characteristics. They also have these claws at the end of their feet called tarsal claws, and then they have something called a lamellate antenna. We don't see it in this picture, but I think I have another picture. So you're going to look for this beetle on plants. It's subterranean, so it lives underground. The males emerge first, and then they go looking for females. And they've got to have really good antennae to find subterranean females. So that's why they have these lamellate antennae. I'll show you what those look like. Again, you've got the tarsal spikes. You have the curvature of the tarsal claws. And this is kind of an example. If anybody watches Batman, on his gloves, he's got these little spikies out. So these are the lamellate antennae. They're like a stem, and then at the end you've got these plates that kind of stick out. And what that does is it increases the surface area so that the antennae could capture more molecules. And because these females are so hidden under the ground, it's really important to be able to sniff them out. So this is Pleocoma. This is a rain beetle. It's California's largest insect. And here's an example of another dung beetle rolling around in the poop. And then we're going to get into the lady beetles. Again, ladybugs are not ladybugs. Let's correct each other. They're lady beetles. You can see the line down the back. And they're typically reddish with dark markings, but they can be the reverse. And then you have some other colorations. You have some mildew-feeding beetles, which are called 20-spotted lady beetles, which are not that. They're kind of a cream color. But they vary in color. They tend to be dome-shaped. They tend to be convex, more convex. They tend to be kind of more circular than elongate. And a lot of the leaf beetles, which these can be confused for, are more elongate. And these are predators. And you'll find lady beetles on plants. iNaturalist is really good at identifying lady beetles because they're pretty distinct. This one has 7 spots. This one has no spots. So this is the California lady beetle, and they get busy sometimes. They remind me with this white patch of another animal called an orca, and they have these white patches. So this is the California lady beetle, and it's a predator. And these are the convergent lady beetle. Now they can usually you can count the spots on these, and they have up to about 12 spots, but the sizes of the spots can vary to being absent. So there's a lot of diversity in how these look. So you may see some of these that have no spots at all, and they're called convergent lady beetles because on their back are these white spots. On the pronotum or the thorax, you've got these 2 white lines that converge. These do overwinter as a group, and they converge in numbers, but they're named for the converging white lines on their back. And these are also available commercially. Lady beetles are known to be voracious predators of aphids and other soft-bodied insects, especially pests on plants. So you can get these commercially. And here is the price on Amazon. But you can go to your local nursery and probably also get these. Now, the immatures are elongate. They're not dome-shaped like the adults. And again, larvae, it literally means not like the adult. So it looks different. It's got a long body, and you may have seen these and squished them But these are good guys on your plants. They're also eating aphids. Elongate with the legs up front, kind of like an alligator. And these are good predators. And these are the eggs of the lady beetle. Somebody, I'm sorry, it was Barbara said that I would show some pictures of some eggs, and they're pretty characteristic. They're always bright orange, and they're usually laid on plants. So you don't want to squish these, but they lay them on other areas too. When there's like huge numbers of lady beetles, you'll find them on walls and on tires and all kinds of crazy places. And again, when these hatch, these are going to be predators. The next group of beetles that we're going to talk about are the rove beetles. And rove beetles are ground-dwelling beetles that are really good at capturing insects to eat. This is an introduced species, an invasive species. It's called the devil's coach horse, but it has this behavior that when you approach it, and this has happened at my job where they get into the hallway sometimes, and as people approach them, they'll turn their abdomen up. A lot of insects have this reflex that when they're frightened, they'll curve their abdomen. These curve their abdomens upward, and then they release a noxious odor or liquid, and then rodents and things like that learn not to eat this insect. So this is the devil's coach horse. This is introduced from Europe. The next group of beetles we're going to talk about are the domestic beetles. And these are really tiny beetles that are on flowers. So I think this is, it's in the carrot family. But you'll see them on the plants, and they're out here eating pollen. That's their job. A lot of insects, we don't really talk about this economy that's below our economy, but this is just economy of transfer of pollen. And pollen is very rich in proteins. So bees and other insects that want their young to develop are after the pollen because growing kids need meat or proteins. So this is a domestic beetle. Now, this one is mottled in coloration. They can sometimes also be all black because they have these scales on their exoskeleton, on their elytra, their wing covers that rub off. So like butterflies have scales and they come off, so do the scales on these beetles. The problem with these guys is they sometimes get indoors, and because they like proteins, they'll eat a lot of things that are of animal origin, including wool scarves. So this is a scarf I pulled out of my drawer. I didn't know I had a beetle infestation. These guys get indoors and they do bad stuff. They're also called, they're called carpet beetles, domestic beetles, and they're also called museum beetles because they will get into a museum. They'll eat your insect collection, watch out. They'll eat your stuffed animals, they'll eat your furs, they'll eat your wools, they'll eat your feathers. These guys can do a job indoors. The next group of beetles is the longhorn beetles. And these have really long antennae. They're named after the Texas Longhorns, the type of cattle that have really long antennae. And so that's characteristic for them, but also they tend to be kind of rectangular shape. This is a large beetle about 2 inches long, and it's called the ponderous pine beetle because it lives in pine. And then it lives in also other trees, usually dead and dying trees. And you'll sometimes see if you're out on a hike, and I know Deb has probably seen this, you'll see these stumps that have these holes in them. And those are actually hollowed out by the larvae of these beetles. They're pretty big, maybe almost 1.5 inches wide, but it shows how destructive these guys can be. And again, they're getting into dead and dying trees. So the tree's already gone, and it's a good thing that these beetles are getting there, because when they tunnel the base of a tree like this, it's more likely to fall over during a windstorm or another storm. And in California, where we have so many trees dying, it's important that we have trees that are knocked down, that there are insects that are actually knocking these guys down. It might seem like they're doing a bad thing by knocking over a dead tree, but that's actually part of the nitrogen cycle, the carbon cycle. All of that stuff in the tree needs to get back into the ground. And then also with California's wildfires, you really don't want to have a bunch of dead trees standing because it increases intensity of the fire, these beetles reduce the standing fuel available for the fires in California. Another group of beetles is the ground beetles. These are also dark beetles, which live on the ground. These are pretty voracious predators. If you look at their mouth parts, they're really well developed. And these are beetles that feed on snails. And it's not the garden snail that we get from Europe, but it's the native snails that we have here. Those mouth parts can get inside the shell of a native snail and eat it. So these are really attractive. They tend to always be dark. There's a structure on the bottom. There's a configuration of how the legs are put together where you use to identify this. I'm not going to go into that. But the tenebrionids, which are the other ones that might be confused with these, are vegasauruses, and these are carnivores. And then here's another one. This is called a millipede hunter. And they're really interesting. They have, again, the really large mandibles. And what they do is they will climb on top of a millipede and cut its nerve cord. And that's what these mandibles are for. They get on top and then they saw until the nerve cord is actually cut. And then they eat the millipedes. And some of the millipedes that we have in California and in the Bay Area contain cyanide. So it's really important that the beetle is able to overcome the millipede before it secretes cyanide. Millipede hunter, also a predator. And this is another predator. This is a tiger beetle, and it has really well-developed mandibles. It's called tiger beetle because it runs its prey down. As an immature, it lives underground, and it pokes its head up and pulls prey down into the hole. They tend to live springs or waterways, and you can find these guys when you have a combination of sunlight, sand, and water. And then these are really good flyers. So you may be walking along a shoreline and you see all these flies scattered. They may not be flies. They may be tiger beetles. They're extremely good flyers. What they'll do is they'll fly 20 feet away from you and turn around. And when they land, they're facing you. And the way to catch them is not to use. You got to go to one of these cheap stores, get a bamboo net that's made for like 2-year-olds. It's on a long pole with a small diameter top and a shallow net. Because these guys, when you try to capture them, you lose them in the net, or they try to get underneath the net. And if you have a shallow net and you capture that sucker and then shake the end of the net into the ground, you got these guys captured. That's my trick. I shouldn't have told you. So these are the mouth parts of the tiger beetle. They're really well developed. You can see a labrum here. You can see some of the palpi here. So the head is really concerned with sensory. So the thorax is where the legs and wings attach. The head has the eyes, the antennae, and the labia, the palpi, which are used for tasting. Antennae are used for smelling, and the eyes are used for seeing. But these mouth parts are really, really good at catching prey and allowing the beetle to wolf things down. That again is a predator. Now this guy here, this lovely couple, these are called soldier beetles. They can also be called leatherwing beetles because the wings are actually pliable. They're not as hard as the wings of many other types of beetles. And this is the female. She's big. She's full of eggs. And what she does is she grabs the male and carries him around. I call them liberated beetles because if you think the reverse of what Neanderthals used to do, the female is actually in charge. So now we're going to talk about the true bugs. True bugs are in a suborder. They're not their own order themselves. They used to be. They've been separated into 3. The order Hemiptera used to only contain the true bugs, but now it also contains aphids and plant hoppers and other things. So the Heteroptera, I'm just going to go through these really quick. 3,850 species in California. There are a variety of different types of Heteroptera, and they're plant feeders, and they are predators. This is a toad bug. This lives along streams. Looks like a toad, has bug eyes. It's semi-aquatic predator. This is a stink bug. A lot of people know these. They actually deserve their name more than any other insect. Most of them are plant feeders, but there are some that are actually predators. They lay their eggs like this in like barrels that are clumped together. That's a predator. This is the half wing, a close-up of a half wing of a heteropteran. This is an assassin bug. These live on the tops of plants. You'll look for these on plants, especially when there's a lot of foliage. This is the California bee assassin. So it does take bees. And it has this beak here. So you know it's a true bug. And then the crisscrossing of the wings, you can actually see that really good here. Tells you it's a bug. And then here's another assassin bug. Here is a leaf hopper assassin. This is a smaller assassin bug. And then this is one of our plant bugs. And you can see the wings crisscrossing. You've got this division here called a cuneus, which tells you it's in the family Meridae. And here's a close-up. This part of the wing is subdivided. And then here are my references. There's a lot of photos here. 95% of them are mine, but for those that are not, I have this this credit for us to.
All right.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much. We have a lot of questions for you. So I am going to go ahead and start asking them. Yeah, it's pretty amazing. Thank you so much, Eddie, for your presentation. So we had, do lady beetles eat monarch caterpillars?
I would say no, because the monarch caterpillars are poisonous. There's a possibility they might eat the eggs, but I think that some of the I can't remember what the compound is that passes that's sequestered by the caterpillar as it feeds. That may be passed to the eggs, so the eggs may actually be noxious. They could try it, but
So there is some evidence that lady beetle larvae do feed on eggs of monarch butterflies, and also at least the young caterpillars, the small caterpillars.
okay,
There was a recent study.
okay, good.
Yeah, unfortunately.
Well,
Yeah, the monarchs are threatened. A lot of insects are threatened. There was a study by German scientists just a few years ago that looked at preserves, and preserves are where you would expect insects to be doing well. But 75% of the flying insects at these preserves had disappeared. And because of that, and the worldwide loss of insects, there was a Cornell University study that showed that 3 billion birds in North America have disappeared since the 1970s. So there's a cascading effect. Somebody asked the question, how many insects, how many insect eggs make it to adulthood? Not as many as we need.
wow. All right. The next one is from Rashmi. Can beetles bite people?
Depends, kind of like with spiders. It depends on the size of the mouth parts. So I've been bitten and I've actually screamed. I showed you a picture of shut up of a beetle. It was like 2 inches long. Yeah, I've been bitten by one of those. So it has larger mouth parts. I've been bitten by tiger beetles, and they have those really scary mouth parts, and they can't get through my skin. Not that it's so thick, but they can't get the leverage. The larger the mouth parts are, the longer, the less leverage you have. So even though they may look scary, like there's what is that one? A fish fly has really big pinchers as mouth parts. They can't bite you at hard at all.
Good to know. The next one is somewhat related. Can ground beetles eat snail shells?
Can they eat the shells? Can, but I don't know if they will. I mean, there's calcium in the shell. I imagine if they're, starving for calcium, they could try. They can eat the shell, but I don't know that they do.
Okay, so I just wanted to very quickly share a couple of resources that we all used, and at least I love. There's few books. We will share this with you later on, so don't feel like you need to write down something. And then I really wanted to share Eddie's Facebook group, because I think these Facebook groups are really important to educate people and to teach everyone how insects are actually really interesting and awesome, because people are just scared of things they don't know and don't understand. But if you have a place like this Facebook group or iNaturalist or other similar places where you could go and get information about these different insects, then maybe they're not that scary and we don't need to spray them all and kill everything, because insects are not doing well worldwide, as Eddie mentioned. And we will hopefully get back to that on a separate webinar at some point. But there are some things that we can all do, and we shared that in some of our previous webinars. So yeah, and the other resource here is the Celsius Society, which is just about conservation of insects and other invertebrates. And I think it's amazing that the job that they do. So you can find a lot of information on their website. And then just a few of our, if you're local, because I know that not everyone here is local, but we do have some great events coming up. There's the California Biodiversity Day, which is actually a week. And we will host a BioBlitz September 7th. You could join us for this. We have another BioBlitz on October 6th. And regardless if you're local or not, you should all join Gull Week, which is an event we made up a few years ago, and hundreds of people worldwide join it and record observations of gulls. And if you don't know what gulls are and how you should do that, you could go to one of our previous webinars and learn all about that, because I can spend a lot of time just talking about it now, which I shouldn't. So this is what I wanted to share. And now I'll stop sharing my screen so we can all see each other. If you want to share your video with us or not, and if you have any other questions, right?
Barbara, Jeff asks, are wasps pollinators? I'm not sure if we got an answer for that one yet.
Wasps are pollinators, but they aren't as efficient as bees because they tend not to be as fuzzy. But they do, since they're visiting flowers and going from one to the other, they do transfer some pollen.
Cool.
Yeah, and I want to just quickly add a note that people, when they think about pollinators, they usually think about butterflies and bees, but wasps are definitely important pollinators as well as flies, because we saw all these beautiful flies
True.
that kind of look like
Yes.
bees because they visit flowers as well. So, and then there are other insects that you might find on flowers. Even ants can pollinate. They're probably
Beetles.
not beetles. Yeah, definitely beetles. So not all of them are as good as pollinators as bees are, because they're so specialized to pollinating flowers, but they are definitely important as well.
Do any parasitical wasps occupy the Bay Area, Barbara?
Yes, they do. Some families are primarily parasitic. There are a lot of times caterpillars. One year I tried to figure out what caterpillars were on oaks since I couldn't identify the larvae, I tried to rear them, and a high percentage of them, parasites emerged from them. They could have, some of them were fly parasites, but many of them were wasp. Also, I looked at a deer carcass once where there were a lot of flies buzzing around, and I took pictures, posted them to iNaturalist, and some of the small wasp there were probably there not to feed on the deer carcass, but to feed on the fly larvae that were in the deer carcass. Those were Braconidae wasp. And even that velvet ant is a parasite. It preys on a lot of native bees that live in burrows. I mean, its larvae are parasites on those.
I just want to share a couple of things. Elizabeth says, great big crowd and useful, clear information. Thank you both. Thank you all of you for contributing. And then another comment from Maya is fun fact, black soldier fly larvae are popular to feed to pet reptiles. She says, my leopard gecko loves them. And Merav chimed in, my chickens love them too. So one of the things Eddie brought up was the pine borer beetle, and they eat the dead trees, but how do they get to the dead tree? Do they live underground and come up after a fire, or do they fly to the newly downed tree?
Okay, so the one that we look at, which is the ponderous pine beetle, but it has a few different names. I think it's also called the pine sawyer beetle. They fly from June to September in the Bay Area. So they're already in a tree. They finish their development in the tree, and then they exit as adults, beginning about July, maybe June, and then they're looking for mates. So they're smelling they're cues that trees give off when they're in distress. So they can pick up on those cues, and the most distressed tree is probably the best tasting tree. So those beetles are headed to that tree. That's where they're going to find their mates, and that's where they're going to lay their eggs. So the question, I'm sorry, I talked about what I wanted to talk about.
Oh, that's great. Maya had a question, and she asked, how do you stop carpet beetles from eating your insect collection? They've somehow gotten into my framed ones.
Oh my God. Okay, so there's some museums that offer a service where you can take your collection there or whatever else is infested, and they will put it into a sub-zero freezer. You might be able to get the same effect in your own freezer. I don't know. I haven't ever tried it. I actually killed infestations in my insect collection that way through my own freezer. You want to prevent them. Prevention is the best way to do it. But if you already have them, and you want to be careful what's inside of your collection, because what I'm going to recommend is paradichlorobenzene, which um, mothballs. There are two different types of mothballs. Paradichlorobenzene will kill an active infestation. There's another type of mothballs called naphthalene, and that will repel insects, but it's not going to kill them. You can also raise the temperature of your collection up to 140 degrees. Leave it that way for a half an hour. I think 20 minutes at 140 degrees is supposed to do it. But you want to be careful. If you've got plastics in there and other things that might melt. And also some of the chemicals I just mentioned will react with plastics. And if you've got plastizoid foam at the bottom, the foam, it may react with the foam. So be careful how you do it.
Some additional opportunities for people to raise their hand, and we can ask some questions. But I actually had one that I think maybe other people are interested in, which is, how do you guys study them? They're such fine critters, and Merav, when she's given her talk, she usually talks about the tools that she uses. So I'd like to know how you, Barbara, and Eddie study them.
A camera, I find, is essential, especially since they're so small. If you can get a picture, even with my iPhone, you can enlarge it. I put it on my laptop and I think, wow, I see details I never saw in real life. So that's very helpful. I think a camera is essential. If you want to find them, I used to, when I worked with kids, you look in flowers and under logs and things, but I also really like occasionally getting those red Solo cups that people use at parties for drinks, burying in the ground so that the soil is flush with that, leaving it just overnight, because there are a lot of active ground beetles and they will fall in there as like, it's a pitfall trap. And you find all sorts of things that you never knew were in your yard.
Those are good ideas. I want to recommend a magnifying loupe. These are the poor man's microscope. You can get these pretty cheaply on Amazon and from other places. You want to get at least a 10 power. And the way you use them is you put them over your eyeball, and then you bring your specimen up close. A lot of people try to do this, and that's not how you do it. It's got to go over the eye and then bring your specimen up close. So magnifying loupes. There's a group I think they're in Oklahoma. It's called precisionproducts.us. There's a $25 minimum, but you can get a whole bunch of loops really inexpensively. Precisionproducts.us.
I'm on mute. Uh, I have my macro lens on my phone, which I really like. I have two different macro lenses here. And those are really useful because I can get really close to my object. And just like Barbara said, when we do a BioBlitz events or something like that, I could easily take a close-up photo of something. This is actually not my photo, but just to show you what I mean. I could show someone the details, and it's like, oh, so look at this is a lichen, but look at the insect's antenna. This is their legs. This is their gills. This is just what I did on Sunday on our BioBlitz when I showed someone mayfly larva from the pond. So we were able to see the gills and how they move in order to get more oxygen. So very useful.
All right. Well, I want to be respectful of people's time. So what we'll do is I will close us out, but feel free to stay online, and you can, again, raise your hand and ask questions as we move through. So thank you so much for joining us for the Naturalist training, where you've learned about the incredible world of insects. There's so much more to learn, and we hope to dive deeper in the future. Merav already threw out another topic idea. Thanks to our presenters, Merav Vonshak, Barbara Banfield, and Eddie Dunbar. They're happy to answer additional questions you may have. We're developing additional training events and plan to host more on topics including nighttime creatures, which is one that we've discussed. If you have any ideas, send me your topic suggestions. And this recording will be available within a couple of days, and you'll receive a link in the follow-up email. It will be posted on our YouTube channel. But in the meantime, you can find additional videos of the virtual BioBlitz events and training on our YouTube channel, and you can register through our website or Merav's for our upcoming BioBlitz events. So as I mentioned, I just want to thank everyone for attending this webinar.
Deb, I want to say how important it is and how much I appreciate the work you do there at Coyote Creek. I've found a lot of good insects there. I enjoy going on the BioBlitzes with Merav, and I want to encourage other people who are listening to also join us. There's a lot to see, and the more you know about, the more you are informed when we have to make decisions about protecting the environment, climate, use of pesticides, and preserving natural spaces.
So I have Maya who talks about buying supplies from BioQuip, but they went out of business. So Eddie, you mentioned one company for collecting supplies, and Merav and Barbara, I don't know if you want to contribute some other ideas of where to get your tools.
Well, some tools you can, I find a white sheet is really useful. I used to love to spread it out under a bush or a tree and shake the branches, and lots of things come out, and you see them, if they fell on the ground, they'd disappear in their buggy camouflage. They'd match the grass and the ground. You can also just use a small tray, and they call it, entomologists call it a beading tray, and shake a little branch over it and you see it. So those are things you can just scrounge. And if you want to get fancy, you can order a black light and hang that sheet up on your clothesline or put it over a chair and put the black light in front of it at night. And I suppose you'll talk about that in your nighttime animals, but a lot of moths and other insects are attracted to black lights at night. I also keep a camera, and I take my camera into the backyard when I'm gardening and weeding, because it is amazing, if you're ready, how many insects you capture just when you're down there messing with your tomatoes or picking beans or cutting flowers. There's a lot to be seen in most backyards.
want to add that there is a group that's trying to take over for BioEquip. UC Berkeley is one of the groups that's trying to promote this new group. I don't remember what it's called. Hopefully we can get back. BioEquip was the one place that everybody went. And when I say everybody, I'm being liberal, to get their insect supplies. They had everything that you needed. You could get it all at one source. When my students are taking classes, now they have to go to 6, 7 different sources to get what they need. We need another BioEquip. Um, so talk to Peter Oboisky. And I think it's just P. Oboisky at berkeley.edu. He can tell you what that new organization is.
And I just can't emphasize making use of iNaturalist. If somebody comments on it, don't be shy about asking that person that identified your caterpillar or your beetle or fly and asking, how can I tell it? Sometimes people point you to great resources or answer questions. So if you're really interested, you can dig into that.
Yeah, I agree. So I think iNaturalist is one of the reasons I like it so much is because people are so generous with their knowledge and they're happy to answer your questions. And yeah, it's not the end of the discussion, it's just the beginning. And there are also lots of different projects that you could join on iNaturalist.
Right.
For example, if you observed a fly, then there's this amazing fly group on iNaturalist. We will definitely share that link with you with the rest of the resources. And if you're interested in learning more about fly identification, they actually have a weekly session where they teach people how to identify flies. And it's amazing, like how detailed they get. So the wonderful resources on iNaturalist on its own. So the easy option is to just take any loop and try and, use it on your lens. It's not easy, but it's the cheapest and, most available option. What I have, unfortunately, is not available anymore, and it's on my website. You can find a link to that, but you need to find that somewhere on eBay or something like that. They stopped making those a while back. And then Efren recommended Moment, which is a really good brand for different lenses. So I would definitely try that. I love the ones that slide onto your phone. I think those are really handy, but they're not very easy to find. So there are all sorts of clip-on lenses, like the ones made by Moment.
If you're doing macro photography, it takes a little while to get good at it. I use a 105 millimeter full frame lens. You can get larger insects with a 60 millimeter macro lens, but I think using less than 105 for professionals it is not advised. If you really want to get really good photos, you want to have 105.
I've used an Olympus TG6. It takes, and they don't come with instructions. So it's taken me a long time to get it dialed in where I can take good macro photos. They have almost like a microscope mode, but insects have, there's a shallow depth of field when you're that close. So they have something called photo stacking mode, where it takes several pictures and integrates them into one. But the insect cannot be moving. So it does not work for if you're chasing down an ant that's constantly moving.
Yeah, and if we're speaking about macro photography, I highly recommend using a flash.
Absolutely.
Until I used it the first time, I didn't understand why people bother, but it's just such a huge improvement of your macro photography, because other than looking at, a little black insect, you could see the texture, you could see every little something on their cuticle. It's amazing what you get when you have a good flash and you learn how to use it, because that's a whole world on its own, how to use flash correctly. But that's really useful. And then this is for things that you could get really close to. which many insects would actually let you get very close to them. But for other insects, it's actually very helpful to have a telephoto lens, because then you can get many different pollinators. So you can get butterflies and bees and flies and many little things that won't wait for you to get all the way to them and, you know, set up your flash and all that. So it's actually useful to have both.
Not a question, but I was going to say, Barbara, your point about taking a camera in the garden. I find I always see the insects when I don't have the camera with me.
Yes,
That's the best way
When
to
I
see
take the
them.
camera, I don't see anything, but you keep
Yes.
flying back and forth.
yes. I agree.
And thank you, folks. This was a great presentation, and it's very nice to see Merav and Deb in person. I've seen your names on many, many places related to wildlife. Eddie, I've actually met in person in the past.
Well, and join those in-person events.
I will try. I will try. The timing, if the timing works out, I would love to.
Yeah.
Yeah, we try to have our events at least once a month. Have a Biblets in person, and then the webinars about every other month or so. But yeah, it's different than actually walking in the field and looking for things together. And we had one in-person training field trip, and we'll hopefully have a few more in the future.
Yeah, that was fun. We talked about serpentine on the naturalist training, and then I think it was also how to use iNaturalist to its fullest. And then we went out to, we didn't end up getting out to Coyote Ridge because it was too muddy, but we went to the next best place, which is adjacent to it, to explore what lives in the serpentine environment. So having those field trips to follow on to what we've been learning as part of the naturalist training is really great. And thanks to Merav for helping to make those happen.
Yeah, and I see that there's a question about how insects recognize each other so that they can meet and mate, which is a wonderful question. So unlike us, for insects, the most important sense is probably the sense of smell. And they can sense each other from very long distances. Moths, for example, can detect the male moth has this really beautiful antenna that look like feathers. Probably not all species, you know, there are always exceptions, but many of them have this beautiful feather-like antenna where they can smell the female, even if it's far, far away. It's enough to just get a molecule of smell or so. And they can fly and find that female and mate with her. So those molecules will be highly species specific, so that to prevent that one male will find a female of a different species. Of course, sometimes you can find hybrids of different things, but in general, they would probably use sense of smell to detect each other. Some of them look very different from one another, even closely related species. But I would guess that that's the most important sense that they use. Would you like to add something?
This time of year, if you step out in your backyard right now, I bet you'll hear insects, especially if it's warm. And that is another way, especially at night, insects find each other by chirping. If they're crickets or cicadas make other noise, kind of clicking, wing tapping cicadas. And then we don't have them around here, but in some places they use like signals like lightning bugs flash. A certain different species have a different kind of, just like lighthouses have a different flash that you can recognize.
Yeah, thank you. That's great. And I just wanted to say that the insects that call during the day or during the night will have slightly different calls that are species specific. So even on iNaturalist, by the way, you can record these calls. So I can hear some crickets and possibly katydids right outside my office here. And I can record that on iNaturalist. And then sometimes experts would identify these two species, which is really cool.
For the day flying insects, there's some that are visual. Some of the bees and a lot of the flies. The males have really large eyes, and because females don't stand still, they have to be visual. So if you smell her here, but she's over there, um, that's not going to work too good. So drones, uh, uh, bees, male bees, are really, and that's one of the difference. One of the ways you can tell a male from the female is whether or not the eyes meet in the middle or whether they're separated. Um, so yeah, just be aware that yeah, there are some visual insects.
There are
You're definitely
visual
right.
flies that have, if like a lot of times you'll see a swarm of small gnat-like flies or mayflies, and you can see the mayflies will be flying back and forth in this up down zigzag pattern back and forth. So you'll see other flies join them. And then there are other flies that kind of swirl around in a little spiral. A lot of times, especially aquatic insects, seem to use this mating strategy. They have distinctive little dances.
You can take a pebble and throw it through that swarm, and the male flies will chase it. Some of the male flies will see it and chase it. Yeah, those are mating swarms.
Hey, Eddie, I have a question for you. You talked about the spikes on the scarab beetle.
Yeah.
What are they for? What's the purpose?
Well, it differs among the species. The dung beetles, it's really okay. So you have the tarsi, which are basically the fingers. So you've got these different segments. Those are the tarsi. Then you have the tibia. That's where the spines occur. On a lot of the scarab beetles are actually subterranean, so that helps them to dig, especially the dung beetles. With the dung beetles, the tarsi is really, really small, and all you really mainly have is those spikes to help them to pull the dirt apart. So evolutionarily, that's why they exist, but how they came about was probably some genetic aberration, and then it worked, and through natural selection, those are the beetles that survived.
Since we have so many insect experts here, can I ask a slightly off-topic question? I was on a trip to Borneo recently, and I took this photograph of some creature. It's not a great photograph, but it looks like an ant, but it doesn't seem to match any ant there. Hang on, let me see if I can share it. And then somebody on iNaturalist suggested it might be an ant mimic spider.
That looks like a spider.
That looks like an ant mimic spider to me. There are a lot of
Okay.
spiders that look not just in shape like ants, but they kind of run and move like ants too.
Exactly. Okay.
Yeah, they're amazing. Ant mimicking spiders are just amazing. You know, they have 4 pairs of legs, and ants have 3 pairs of legs and antenna. So they will use the first pair of legs like antenna. They will walk with them like that to look even more like an ant. So yeah, just like Barbara says, it's not just the way they look, it's their behavior. It's amazing.
Yeah, and even ant mimic spiders, of course, iNaturalist doesn't seem to have anything matching that, but at least I'm closer to the maybe finding it. Thank you.
Yeah, but once you post it, you know, you never know. Someone might see it. And
At some
even if
point,
it's
right.
not
Yeah, that's
now,
the great thing with iNaturalist is even a year later, 2 years later, somebody might chime in.
exactly. Sometimes it takes time.
Yeah, I started with birds, but now I'm looking a lot more at insects also, so it's fun. A lot of learning.
Keep going.
Yeah, and I
fun.
bet Borneo is the best place for both.
Yeah, actually, birds' life is not as good as some other tropical areas, but interesting stuff. But yeah, insects and mammals were very, very interesting. Cool.
Nice.